Hi, Leigh Ann. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. It's so good to see you.
You too.
So we spoke not too long ago, and I'd like to just jump right in. But something that you said in our previous conversation has stuck with me that I really would love for you to elaborate, because I think this will resonate with a lot of people who are listening, which is we were talking about your history in performing arts and you own your own studio company, and that you were at the local chamber for a meeting and you were around a bunch of other business owners. And I think you'd mentioned that it kind of went around the circle of what everyone does. And you mentioned your performing arts. And then everybody kind of went on with the conversation as if you're smiling. So you're recalling that. Can you kind of
I think I
elaborate?
remember their words. I think I remember their words were, "Oh, that's cute. Thanks."
Perfect. Yes. And I think I
Yeah,
remember saying, oh, like you just got the virtual pat on the head, right?
exactly.
I have this conversation all the time with people in the creative sector. And because you don't have a not-for-profit, correct? You have a for-profit
Correct.
business, and you still deal with that. Can you just talk through living with that? Because also touch on your mission, because you did go into how the conversation carried on. And what they were talking about, wanting to solve the world problems, you said that's our very mission. So elaborate for me.
Yeah. So, after that comment happened, the sort of circle of the conversation came back to this idea of we just are struggling with workforce development. We can't find young talent that has people skills and work ethic and can be responsible for things that we can depend on without tons of supervision. And, internally, I kind of just chuckled to myself because to me, that's exactly what kids training in the arts does. I mean, that's exactly what at my studio, they literally almost spelled out our mission and goals, which is building relationships, developing responsibility, all of those soft skills that are so integral to the workplace are what the arts give kids and adults for that matter. And yeah, I mean, that's been a common refrain. I can also remember like the first time after I had opened my business, I went into, I think it was at a car dealership and I was in the loan office and I was discussing this with the guy and I had all my paperwork and he was like, "Oh, that's so cute what you do." It's like, I mean, I literally wanted to just pack up all my stuff and take my business elsewhere because first of all, I don't like to be patted on the head on a good day, but especially for my work because I'm really passionate about it and I've worked really hard at it. I think I am like most people who wind up in careers like I've chosen where, we went through school, we got a degree in some discipline, my degree is in music. And then, we have this opportunity to start teaching and maybe that grows. And that's what happened with me. And then people kept asking the question, where can my kid go to take a class or do a show? And eventually it was like the writing was on the wall that our community needed this. And, but I didn't know anything about business. I mean, I had to learn all of that the hard way, which, for me was just surrounding myself with smart people and asking lots of questions. But yeah, I think that's been a common refrain and I try to be gracious about it. And so I'll casually just say, yeah, it's amazing. We serve about 500 kids every week in our building. And then suddenly they're like, oh, like that's a lot of people. Yeah. And, even our own families in my studio often don't realize how many kids we're serving because we work really hard to still feel small and intimate and like we know everybody. So that's definitely been a theme all along this process and this journey of owning this business has been sort of finding ways to hold my own within, especially our local business community.
And that's one thing why I set out on a journey a while ago to lead a renaissance of relevance is what I'm calling it, because
I love
I
that.
I I believe that if we can prove, or if everyone understood really how relevant the arts creatives are, we wouldn't have to justify for resources or revenue or how to survive. And so what advice do you have to peers who also face these situations where they're just kind of referred to as, isn't that cute? That's sweet. Like I'm ready to shake it up. Leigh Ann. I want to get tough.
Yeah.
That's why one of the things I'm focusing on is how do we build a vocabulary around our return on art? So let's sit at the table and you want to talk about ROI. Well, I think we talk about ROA because I actually think that your return on art is a greater long-term value than any short-term, quick return around, an investment, which is just transactional. Can you touch on that and what advice you have to those, or just, that you're not alone out there when you also deal with with these situations in your own community?
When I was coming out of college and when I was in college and, I was working in music education, and when I first graduated from college, I was in public school. There was a real push for us to legitimize ourselves as art for art's sake, right? Like, art is worth having in the community. It's worth investing in our community because it's art and it's important to us as human beings. And while I still 100% believe that, and I believe that it's a part of our human experience and it's as important to our human experience as any other, factors that we incorporate, I think that in order for us to make real headway, we're almost having to shift back to this idea, like you said, of what's the return? Because especially when we're looking at the business community or feeling like we need to legitimize ourselves, it's ultimately going to happen. It's beautiful for us to say that art is worth it for art's sake. But the truth is, when we get to the nitty gritty of people who maybe don't participate in the arts or haven't participated in the arts or just think the arts are going to the symphony once a year or they got dragged to a musical somewhere, I think we have to talk about the ways that building those skills within the arts are impactful to human beings for the long term. So whether that's the touchy-feely stuff, which is like it builds empathy, it builds camaraderie, it builds relationships, or whether it's the fact of the matter that it builds responsibility, it builds commitment to a cause, it's teamwork. I mean, I always tell our parents, the arts are teamwork every bit or more as much as sports are. It takes every person who's a part of a cast or a crew or, whatever to get a show off the ground. So I think it's really important that we cover both sides of that. But I think at the end of the day, we all have to realize, which is, again, why I think the mission that you've set and the work that you're doing is so valuable, because it gives us that jumping off point. It gives us that language to say, this is really important, and here's why. Because it is, and we see it in our students all the time. I mean, I always say, I will never care how many of our students perform professionally or work technical theater professionally or any of those things. It's great. It's happened. We've got some really amazing, talented professional performers. But what I really love is the kids who come back to us and say, theater is the reason that I'm successful in my job. I think I told you about one of our students. Theater is the reason I'm successful in my job at a giant mega bank. Theater is the reason that I'm successful at my job with a giant airline company, which are, students that have come through our program who have gone on to do those things at giant major corporations. And they say, the reason that I do so well in my meetings is because I know how to collaborate. I know how to express my creative ideas. I know how to be empathetic to somebody else's creative ideas. I know how to merge those things and come up with the best of all worlds, because that's just inherent in the creative process. And those kids have been doing it since they were young. So, I think it's such a powerful, important conversation, and I'm really, really glad that you're having it.
Well, I appreciate it. And, it is an everyday, my family would probably think I'm like addicted to arts advocacy, which it's an interesting thing to be addicted to. But I am so determined that we shift this conversation, that we don't have to constantly explain what the arts means. And so you're reminding me of, I was speaking last week to about 100 entrepreneurs about the renaissance of relevance and the importance of arts. And it's not often that I speak to non-artists. I've been focusing a lot on talking to people, whether they're in arts education or nonprofit arts, etc. But this was a group of individuals from all over. And I asked the audience a question. I said, when you think of art, what comes to mind? And we heard, a painting or, a play or, all of these things. And I said, these are people. The arts are people doing the work. And I since then and I saw some like recognition or realization. That aha moment came to me during the pandemic when I was advocating statewide, and I wanted to speak in this business language to lawmakers who, again, at the time were just, the arts were the last thing on anybody's mind from we need to help this industry standpoint, because we're viewed as an extra. We're viewed as something that's nice to have. It's frivolous. We'll get to that later. But when I did my research, the arts were the highest unemployed sector of any, and at times double restaurant and bars unemployment. So how do we communicate what the arts are individuals? It's not an object.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
The arts are people. It's not, paintings and theater productions and symphonies don't just magically appear without human beings. And I think, like I said, I think COVID really, for me, really drove that point home of how important that connection piece is.
Yeah. And as we are facing this health crisis of loneliness, when we have the medical field describing that, I think they equate being lonely to smoking like a pack of cigarettes a day. That's one of the initiatives that we're taking on with this new impact measurement tool, is to be able to look at art's impact as it responds or relates to having individuals feel connected and reducing that loneliness, that chronic loneliness issue that we're facing. I'm reminded, and I think it was you that when we talked earlier too, you'd mentioned something about students when they perform with your organization and they're getting prepared behind stage. Was that you that talked about telling the parents? Okay, describe that, because that was fascinating to me.
Yeah, so when we do productions, and we do several dozen productions a year, the schedule that we keep is really kind of nutty. And so we're sort of a revolving door. We have our own performance venue, which isn't, we call it putting lipstick on a pig, because it's not the most beautiful multi-million-dollar performing arts center, but it's a perfect space for us and for our students. And the thing that I always love to point out to our parents is when we put kids on that stage, we don't fill up backstage with a bunch of grownups. Our youngest, first and second grade, 4 and 5-year-old, 4, 5, 6, 7, that show, they might have 2 teachers backstage. But once they get into 3rd grade, like that 8-year-old range, we don't put adults backstage. We let them figure it out. So if someone loses a prop, they got to figure it out. If someone misses an entrance, they got to figure it out. If someone doesn't bring on a set piece that they're supposed to bring on, they figure it out. And so while it may mean that our product isn't as polished as it would be if I had a whole crew of parents back there, or staff or whatever, it may not be as polished, but I feel like the value of what the kids are learning is so important, because they learn how to navigate the unexpected, which again is another huge life skill, another return on the arts, if you will. And so I think, it's really fun for the parents to sort of conceptualize that, because they can't believe it. They can't believe that the kids made this mistake and figured it out, or had this issue and figured it out. We do the same thing when we strike a show. The kids are the ones who stay. They're the ones who hang up the costumes. They're the ones who put away the props. They're the ones who do. So it's almost from birth to, death of a show. That's sort of morbid, but that entire process is really giving the kids all of those lessons along the way. It's not just about who got the biggest role or who has the most solos, or it's just not the point. So we always say that we're very process over product oriented, because to me, it's not worth having a perfect shiny product if the kids miss all these cool lessons that they could learn along the way. And that's become a really important part of our mission over the years.
That's so great. And I say it's where the process over performance. So we're both on the P alliteration there, because I say transformation happens in the process. It certainly can also happen in the performance for the audience, but really the people that are engaged, it is the process. So as you're describing this as a mother of 2, who are now mid to late teens, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, third grade, like I think of patience. How in the world? Because I remember my kids wanting to help me cook in the kitchen, and it's like it was a lovely concept, and I can't even believe I'm admitting this out loud. But I would just sit there and I'm like, just crack the egg already, or dump,
and then it's everywhere, right?
Exactly. And
They dump
I'm
the flour
walking
and
around,
yeah.
right? I'm walking around with the bowl like this because it's like I don't want to clean this up. So where did you get the idea to do this with the students behind stage and then all of that?
I will say, I think as moms, because I'm the mom, we have 4 kids in our family, four boys, and I'm very impatient as a mom with things like that too. So I think there's a very big difference between me being patient with someone else's kids and me being patient with my own, right? I think any parent, especially any teacher who is also a parent, has experienced that. But really, I mean, it really kind of came about organically when we first started. When I first opened, I shouldn't have enough staff to have 1 million people backstage. And, I wanted the parents to be able to come and enjoy their kids' performances and stuff without having to worry about being backstage or having to worry about volunteering. I felt like they were paying us to provide a service to their family, and I wanted them to be able to come and enjoy sort of the fruit of that without feeling like they had a responsibility. But over time, we realized how valuable that experience was. And so it really became sort of a core part of the way that we approach things. So it kind of happened organically, um, which I think is how most really good things happen to organizations. I think we all set out with really great intentions. And, you mentioned that we're a for-profit business. The only reason I did that is because A, it was quicker, and B, I'm kind of a control freak a little bit. And I'd been a part of so many nonprofits over the years where, a kind of sketchy board moves in and things can really go downhill quickly. So I wanted to be able to sort of be in control of our own destiny, but we sort of really run more like a nonprofit. Our team, it's very collaborative and less like a dictatorship and more like a board. But I just, all of the really great things I think that have happened with our studio over the years have really just been a result of really talented people, because our team is incredible. And my favorite thing is when one of them calls or texts me and says, "Hey, I have an idea," because it's always something good. There's always something great we can pull from it. We can learn from it. We can incorporate, we can add. And so that's really where all of that came from.
Yeah, and you're talking, and so many things are sparking my mind, which is one, the nonprofit status is a tax strategy. It's not a business strategy. You're a business and you're a nonprofit for a tax strategic way. And so it's very similar exactly to what you just explained. But you're also describing being an entrepreneur. You started out, I wrote down, you didn't have enough staff. So you decided, I want the parents to come and enjoy, not have to work and get that. And so you were gritty, you were tenacious, you kind of figured out, like, how do we do this? And it turned out, as you also said, that this organically turned into something that really is beneficial to all. And so for those that think that, oh, you're in the performing arts, that's cute. Talk to me a little bit about the entrepreneur angle. And you also said you didn't have a lot of business background, that you had to teach yourself this. We don't have a lot of business resources as a sector in general that tech or, business school or anything like that have. So how can we support one another in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, when I tell you I didn't have any business experience, I don't know how to tell you exactly how naive I was. I mean, I didn't know what a profit and loss statement was. I had never seen an income statement. I didn't know anything about accounting or bookkeeping or tax write-offs. I mean, I knew nothing. I don't know how to overemphasize how much I didn't know. Um, and so, literally when I started, I had a little notebook, and every dollar that came in, I would write it in. I mean, there was no QuickBooks. And every dollar that went out, I would write out. And the only thing I knew to do was don't spend more than you brought in. That's the primary rule that I operated by, which we still operate by and has served us well. But you know what? I started identifying myself as an entrepreneur first. I decided I was going to talk to myself that way and think about it that way, because that also made me feel legitimate. It made me feel like it's okay if I don't know this stuff, an entrepreneur would go learn. And I just surrounded myself with people who were smarter than me. And I'm not afraid to ask questions. And I'm not afraid to say, I don't know what you meant. Explain it to me like I'm a third grader. And I did that a lot, and a lot. I read every book I could get my hands on. I subscribed to every magazine I could get my hands on. And I think that willingness to not be afraid to ask questions and to not rest on your own pride, I think is really the thing that has made the biggest difference for me. Because I mean, I'm still learning. There's still things that, you know, I'll call my accountant or our bookkeeper and say, okay, can I do this? Or is this a thing? Or how do I handle that? And so that's been, I just think, such an important part. And I think anybody who's working in the arts sector, whether you're in a nonprofit or a for-profit studio, sort of like mine, or a children's theater, whatever that is, you have to be willing to ask lots and lots and lots of questions. And I think you have to be aware enough to really go take those lessons from the business sector and know that they still apply. The same ideals, the same principles. You know, so much of what I learned from reading business books. I didn't learn them from reading books about the arts. Now, do I wish that we had a little bit more of a bridge between those two? Absolutely. And maybe that's my retirement job, because I mean, the hill I'll die on is that we're graduating our students from BFAs and, you know, music degrees and whatever without any kind of knowledge of, I mean, even just what it means to be a 1099 contractor versus a W-2 employee. I mean, a lot of the kids that are coming out of college don't know that. And we're setting them up for failure by not covering that and allowing them to understand, you know, if I'm a 1099, here are the things I need to keep track of, because here are the things I'm going to be able to write off on my taxes. Here's how much I should be saving from each check that I make. Just personal finance type stuff, because so many of our artists are coming out of school as 1099 employees. Most of them, especially if they're working freelance, you know, and so getting them set up with ideas on how to budget when you have a variable income, how to save for taxes, how to keep track of just even systems for how to keep track of the things that you can write off. Can you write off your gas and your mileage? Can you write off, I mean, just all of those things. We're really doing a huge disservice when we aren't educating that way. So like I said, that's a soapbox. That's the hill I'm going to die on. But I just think it's so important, and we're leaving so much out.
So a great segue, because I was going to mention the student that you brought up earlier that yes, you introduced me to, and she and I spoke, and she said she will never forget that you sat her down and said, you know, that's great and all, but take some business classes, learn some things that you can use outside of, because it's not all going to be theater, and you may not make it to Broadway. And she said that conversation completely changed her perspective and really where she is today, sitting in a boardroom at a major bank. And, you know, I just thought that was really wonderful that you had that insight and confidence, if you will, to say to someone, this is fantastic that you've dedicated your life to performing arts, but you also want to think about how do you create a well-rounded individual.
Yeah, I mean, how do you live in the world? And you also, you know, one of the things that because I end up kind of coaching a lot of kids, and honestly, now I end up coaching a lot more parents who are like, they want to go to college for the arts. What do I do? You know, and so much of that is about knowing yourself. And, you know, for instance, when I was in school, I was majoring in theater. I had stars in my eyes. I wanted to be a performer, but I also knew myself well enough to know that I didn't like not having a job, and I didn't like not knowing where my next meal was going to come from, or how I was going to make my rent, or I just knew I wasn't wired that way. And if you want to freelance as a career, you have to be okay with all that. So, I mean, fast forward becoming an entrepreneur is it's not knowing how you're going to pay the rent and how you're going to feed yourself. But I had a little more life experience by that point. But I think, that conversation that I had with her, probably with lots of conversations over lots of years because she was such a part of our program for so long. But yeah, it's that sense of, it's beautiful if you want to perform for a living. And I tell the parents who are looking at, their kids wanting to go and get a BFA somewhere, you still have to look at it with an ROI in mind. So if you're going to go and get $100,000 worth of student loan debt and you're not guaranteed anything from that, you have to consider that. You have to consider, how are you going to pay those loans off? What are you going to do with your life so that you know that you have a steady enough income to get that, get above water with that stuff, or pay your rent, or, whatever. And everybody has different circumstances. I mean, I've had plenty of kids who've had parents who were wealthy enough to be able to sort of support their lifestyle, the kids' lifestyles while they're auditioning, while they're moving to New York, all those things. And some of those kids have gone on to perform professionally, and that's amazing. But some kids, I can see in them, like I could see in her, are you really going to be okay with just freelancing and working at a coffee shop or working as a nanny? Or is that really going to feel okay to you? And even as a teenager, she was like, I don't know. I think I want to have a career that is more grounded and more stable. And there's no wrong or right answer. You just have to know yourself. You have to know how you're wired. And I think that's one of the things that Audrey did so well, is that she was self-aware enough, which is another thing the arts teaches us. She was self-aware enough to look at her preferences and her family and her circumstances and say, I have this, because she's crazy smart. She had this amazing opportunity to go to school completely for free through through her grades and her test scores and all those things, and get a degree. And she started out in an arts administration type degree and then sort of morphed over time into business. But, it's the sense of knowing yourself. And again, I think the arts is so good at giving us the opportunity to know ourselves, because you have to know yourself to participate.
100%. I'm writing down cookie cutter, and then I write down individuality, where the arts, creatives, it gives us the individuality. Again, I've been talking a lot about AI and automation and how that sucks the humanity out of things, but creatives put it in. You talked a lot about infusing business into creativity, into the arts. I also think that what's lacking in business is that we're not infusing creativity into business teaching. There's so much that has happened since we're separating and we're labeling all of that if we could just get back to a well-rounded perspective or lifestyle, which then takes me to, how much does, now you're doing consulting, and I hope I don't pronounce it incorrectly, the Enneagram. Did I say it right?
You got it.
Good. Tell me a little bit about that, because I had not heard of Enneagram before we spoke. And I'm curious how much that plays into this being self-aware and being able to identify personalities and how we work together.
Yeah, so the Enneagram has kind of gained in some popularity in the last few years. It's kind of become trendy to know your Enneagram type. It's a very Instagrammable thing. But the truth is, the Enneagram is an ancient piece of wisdom that's been around for hundreds and thousands of years, of all the way, you can trace it back to Pythagoras. But it basically, there are nine types, and it's essentially 9 ways of seeing the world and 9 personality drivers. But the thing that I love about the Enneagram that's different than a lot of the other personality typing tools like Myers-Briggs or DISC or any of those other ones is that there's a lot of play and dynamic movement on the Enneagram. And it's not just a box. It's not, my mentor says the Enneagram doesn't give us a box that we fit in. It shows us how to get out of the box we're already in. And so it's been a very important tool for me, because the greater in depth that I've gone in experiencing the wisdom of the Enneagram has allowed me, I think, to be a better leader because I'm able to understand the Enneagram has a lot to do with motivation. So each of the 9 types have a core motivation. And if I can tap into the core motivation of the people on my team, then it just gives me so much more insight into how they experience the world, how they experience my leadership, how they experience the students that are in their room, and how they interact with one another. So it's been this really, really impactful, helpful tool. And I think it's especially great. You know, there are lots of big companies like Chick-fil-A and Home Depot that use this tool and bring in consultants to work with this tool. And I think that it's amazing that there are ways to find a place for it in corporate America. But I think there's an even better place for us to use it within the arts because, I mean, artistic people are already kind of primed for anything that is self-expression or understanding ourselves. I mean, we love that, right? And so I think that the arts community is really primed for this Enneagram wisdom.
Where can listeners find out more about that Enneagram and then even your work in that?
Yeah, you can find me online at leighanncannady.com. There's a little bit about the Enneagram there. And, you know, there's some really amazing books. There's a couple of really wonderful books by the author Suzanne Stabile. She's my mentor that I've learned from the last few years. And she writes really accessible, wonderful books about the Enneagram. She's been teaching and studying it for, I think, over 40. But yeah, you can find the work that I'm doing, you can find on my website at leighanncannady.com, which is really just how do we incorporate this into our arts organizations in a way that will be impactful in not only leading our teams within, but whether you're dealing with an artist that's difficult to understand or whether you're dealing with patrons that are difficult. You know, even organizations can kind of have an Enneagram number because organizations have their own personality. So I think that there's just really a lot of room for good things to come from this wisdom in the arts community.
I think that's fascinating. And I am always interested in new perspectives and kind of a new way of thinking and not getting stuck in the status quo of, you know, well, we've always done it this way. So I will for sure link in the show notes your website and Susan's name and where they can get more information. So I'm looking at the time and I see that we are at the time where I round out the conversation asking my guests, what color do you love the most and why?
I think I love blue the most. And I think it's because blue is all of my favorite things. It's the ocean and the sky. And it's I always feel best when I'm close to water. So I think that's probably my favorite color.
That's great. And for some reason, as you're talking, I feel like your energy is blue. I don't know why that came to me, but just maybe it's like that calming, soothing, but energetic. If you can be all of that in one, I guess there's energy in water, right? But it's also a soothing thing, soothing element.
I'll take that as a big compliment.
Good. I hope so. Well, Leigh Ann, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate all of your insights. And I think that, you know, it will really help listeners as they see that we've got a community out there that's a lot of people are going through the same situation and we can all lean on one another.
Sure. Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.